Well, Dr. Hardy, thank you so much for being here with me today on Inspire Your Success podcast.
Happy to be with you, my friend. You're an awesome guy. Been fun to watch you over the last few years and fun to watch each other, I guess, right?
Absolutely. Well, that's where I have to start and just give you so much thanks because when I found you in January of 2018, I was in, at the time, really the worst spot of my life. I can honestly say that. I quit my six-figure job. I was going to prove to the world I could make money online, and my blog was failing miserably. And I really just got down on myself, went through actually depression looking back. And had I not found you, I don't know really where my life and career would be. Joining AMP helped me make my first six figures writing, learn about the subconscious. Now I absolutely love writing about that stuff, and it's allowed me to pursue professional golf. So just want to extend my thanks. I know you've impacted people all around the world, but just thank you so much. In 2 years, like I said before we went live here, it's amazing how much can happen. So thank you for being the catalyst for that.
Yeah, I love your story. I love watching people who just take an idea and go with it, So it's super, it's fun to see the gains, and it's also cool to recognize that 2020 is going to be a huge year for you, man.
Thank you. Well, I really, really appreciate that. And that's what, anyone on the show, I love going back to where it started. And I think that's really inspiring for a lot of people, hence the name Inspire Your Success. And it's really fascinating to me how much you've been able to accomplish in such a short amount of time. So take us back to like 2014. I was reading some of the book, and you'd mentioned that you'd made $13,000 that year as a grad assistant. And how did that transition into like writing on Medium, and how did you really get your start? Because that seemed to be the beginning point for you.
Yeah. So I began my PhD program in the fall of 2014. So my wife and I moved to South Carolina in like August of 2014, started into my PhD program. And what you do in a PhD program is usually a grad assistant. You either do research or administration. You work basically just a crappy part-time job, to be honest with you. And it allows you some form of work while you're going to school. So usually graduate research assistants make between like $11,000 and like $13,000 a year. You're literally getting like $1,000 a month. It's like so cheap how graduate students live. So that was kind of where I was at when I was first like learning about stuff like Genius Network. As an example, my Aunt Jane joined Genius Network in 2014, right around that time. And I was able to just like watch her grow her business, and I became really interested in that, and that exposed me to something new, and it allowed me to set a new goal. And so in 2015 is when, like early 2015 is when we became foster parents of our 3 kids. And that's when I started to really think about like my writing career, like blogging. I'd wanted to be a writer for a few years, but hadn't done anything about it yet. Was pretty busy with school and just trying to get into graduate school. That was kind of my major goal at the time, was I just want to get into a PhD program, and then I'll figure out the whole writing thing. And I had tried writing like a book here or there, but nothing, like it just got shelved. And so in 2015, it's probably around like March or April, I bought the course by John Morrow. And that's when I started to learn about viral headlines and about platforms like Medium. One of the big things that I think is crucial that allowed me to elevate fast, whereas I think a lot of other people are still like just blogging away, slamming out hundreds of blog posts. Like I've written probably 150 to 200 blog posts over the last 4 years. Like I had the volume, 150 to 200 is a lot, but over like 4 years, that's not extreme. Most of that was within like 2 or 3 years, but the volume of my writing isn't what set me apart. I think the focus and the purpose of my writing is what set it apart, and I'll explain that. So when I was around that time, early 2015, I was very clear that I wanted to become a professional writer. Like that was something I knew that I wanted to do. I decided that earlier, and I was like, I want to be a published writer. I want to make 6 figures or more to provide for my family through writing, and I wanted to get a traditional book deal. And so like what I was describing was my future self at the time. Like I wanted to be someone who was making good money, providing for my family through writing, and I wanted to be a published author. This was just for myself and my own goals, but I didn't want to, although I did self-publish a few books along the way, I wanted to be in the traditional houses. That was something that I personally wanted. I don't think it's necessary for everyone, but that was just what I wanted. And so that future self then allowed me to articulate a specific goal, which for me ended up becoming, after getting a lot of information, asking literary agents, asking other authors, I ultimately decided that my goal or my objective was to figure out how to get a 6-figure book contract with one of the major publishers. And so then once I had that goal, and the brain really needs specific goals because, goals create tunnel vision in a lot of ways. They create perspective. They create selective attention. They allow you to focus on something and see it. And it's got to be tangible enough. So a 6-figure book deal is tangible enough. I could actually see that, and then I could reverse engineer it. So I then asked a ton of questions to authors, bloggers. How do you get a 6-figure book deal? And the kind of theme that I kept hearing was you got to have 100,000 email subscribers. And so once I got that information, that's then kind of the mindset that I went into when I first off got the John Morrow course. I went to that John Morrow course before I ever started blogging. Like before I ever wrote a single post, I was like, all right, if I've got to get 100,000 email subscribers, I got to learn how to write viral stuff. And so like my whole process was very intentional. Like it was like, I need to figure out how to get 100,000 emails so that I can get my book deal. And that's literally what I did. I got the book deal in like January of 2017. And then the book came out in 2018 or in March of 2018, as far as Willpower doesn't work. But I think that having a very specific goal and then owning when the process isn't working. So like one of the concepts in Personality Isn't Permanent is that in order to engage in deliberate practice, like deliberate practice is the type of learning that leads to desired change. Like deliberate practice is real effortful learning. It's not just doing the same thing over and over and over again. Like it's not routine learning. It's difficult transformational learning. You can't engage in that type of learning without having a specific vision of a future self in mind with the attributes you're trying to get. I think as a golfer, you can totally relate. You can't engage in the type of practice that, it's called deliberate for a purpose. And motivation requires also a really clear goal. And also then breaking down the path to getting there and then building the confidence along the way that you can do it. And so for me, that was a big part of my path, was just, I'm going to get that. Like when the why's strong enough, you'll figure out the how. And to me, because I was so committed to the outcome, the process kind of took care of itself. And I was constantly adjusting my process based on the results I was getting. So I'm very much a results over process kind of person. I think that the result really determines the process. It determines the intensity of the process, the clarity of the motivation, the ability to engage in deliberate practice. And so I think a lot of writers, I think their problem is that they overfocus on process and they think that that's enough. They think that if they just keep hacking away at it, that eventually it's going to open up for them, and it's not. Things change, like the platform as it is now. Yeah, you can make money on Medium, but you're not going to ever be able to do what I did on that platform again. Mm-hmm. But you can make a good living there, what I mean, as a writer, but you'll never be able to put yourself in a position where you can make millions of dollars because of that platform.
Yeah, no, I mean, you were able to go, I think, was it 0 to 400,000 on your email list? I mean, those kind of numbers, like big
in 3.5 years, what I mean?
Big companies can't even get that with paid ads. I mean,
I was getting 25 to 30,000 a month for like a year and a half, 2 years. So I mean, 400,000 is what it landed on, but you have to realize in order to get to 400,000, I actually probably got about 700 or 800,000 because you get so many unsubscribes. I mean, I burned through, and I've probably burned through 400,000 or 500,000. You know what I mean? Because when you're getting that many, 1,000 opt out on every email. So it's like,
that's crazy to think about. I guess my numbers pale in comparison to that. So.
Well, but as all I'm saying is I think that the commitment to a vision, and you really have to start with identity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have to start with who is who is your future self. If you start with identity and then you come up with a tangible result, then you can reverse engineer the process. And as you go through that process, your future self becomes your current self.
Yeah, that's perfect segue, because you taught me a lot about identity and self-image and really the subconscious. And I think we talk about it so much in the personal development world, but I think a lot of people still are like, wait, how does this really impact my life? Like for me, when I read Psycho-Cybernetics, that book really clicked with me for some reason. And so I think that's really important that you talk about that, because how do you feel that your subconscious does impact your personality and ultimately what you achieve in life?
Yeah, so subconscious is you on autopilot. It makes up 95% of what you do. Like you're breathing right now, that's subconscious. You're not thinking about it. There's so many things you're doing out of habit, and your subconscious is essentially your current habits. It's just you without trying. And so I think that the subconscious is basically a reflection of your current personality. And so it's very much triggered by and channeled by your environment, the roles you're in, your current identity, and it just plays out over and over. So this is one of the reasons why personality is so repetitious for people. It's because they're on autopilot. They're just living reactively, I guess you could say, or just without intentional thought. I think this is why morning and evening routines are so big, is because from my perspective, a key aspect of the morning is to not live on autopilot, but to actually put yourself in an intentional frame of mind where you maybe would re-envision your future self and say, what am I going to do today to move my life forward? Mm-hmm. And so, rather than living on autopilot and living subconsciously, you actually want to live consciously and intentionally. And what you do when you actually define a future self, and when you every single day give yourself the space to move forward towards a specific goal, is, by living with intention, you have what are generally called peak experiences or just learning experiences. And those experiences uptick your subconscious. They reset the new normal, where you're not just on autopilot, but you're living up towards your future, and your subconscious follows along. And so for me, I'm all about aggressively acting towards my future self, which is by nature acting above your current subconscious. And so I do things all the time to up-level my subconscious. I mean, I actually believe in the idea of just investing in your subconscious, investing money into your future identity, investing money into your goals, into your mentorships, putting yourself into transformational learning environments, doing anything and everything you can to shatter your current perspective of what you think is normal.
Yeah, and you taught me so much about that in that first few months. I mean, I was just like a sponge. Anything you gave me, I just was like running with it. And now I still go back and through those notes because it's made such a big impact. Like you said, investing in yourself, morning routines. And that has led me to all kinds of things, from meditation, self-hypnosis, hypnotherapy, psych kit, yoga, nidra. Like I went down all kinds of things because I'm fascinated by the fact that so much of our identity is shaped at a young age, and we can run on autopilot for the rest of our lives unless we change it. So the future self, to me, is I like this. This is a really powerful exercise I think people can do, because sometimes it might be a little bit too far out there for some people that aren't as into spiritual things and stuff like that. So can you talk about the future self exercise? Like, what would that look like? So say you're listening to this and you want to get somewhere, but you're not there yet. Like, how far out do you think about your future self? I know for you said 2015 to 2017, it was like a 2-year thing between basically getting your book deal. So is that like a good time frame, like 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think you could have a broader version of your future self about like you on your deathbed as an example. Like, mm-hmm. I think it's healthy to think about what you're ultimately striving to become. But I think on a like a practical level, I think 3 years is really a good amount of time, 2-3 years, because that's enough time for tangible change to occur. Mm-hmm. You can actually do a lot in 2 or 3 years, as you and I are both talking about. If you think about who you were 2 years ago, like you've gone through a lot, mm-hmm. And so you can do a lot in 2 or 3 years. And so you can set pretty big ambitions and big imaginations. And then you can, if you're intentional on a daily basis, and if you're making courageous steps forward, and if you're putting yourself into new experiences and actively learning, like you can be shocked by how much you can accomplish in 2 or 3 years. Like, I'll just be blunt and honest. Like my current goal, my current big goal, which would be equivalent to me wanting the 6-figure book deal back in 2015, is to sell 10 million copies of this book. And I don't say that flippantly. I'm not trying to say that like that goal is absurd. Just to give some context, like Atomic Habits has sold about 1.5 million copies. Wow. And that's been one of the bigger books, in the last couple of years. And, but I like the idea of committing to 10 million books, because I'm very clear on why I want that. Like, that's a tangible outcome that would allow me, the future version of me that I'm striving to create at the next stage or the next chapter of my own development. That's the thing that would enable it. And so, I have no clue how I'm going to do it. It's fundamentally beyond my current capacity, way beyond my current confidence, way beyond my current identity. But I wrote this book with that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it took an extra year to write it because I was like, if I'm going to even attempt that, the book's got to at least it's got to be at a level where it can give that a shot. And so I think the reason why I think this is important is because the thing you're going for determines how you do what you're doing right now. Like even how you're filming this podcast is influenced by what you're striving for. Like if you're very clear on what you're striving for, then this podcast is going to lead to more directed learning. And so I think you need to be clear on what you want because it determines, and being clear on what you want, that may be scary, but really just deciding what you want. Where do you want this to take you? Because where you want something to go orients how you deal with this current situation. And so it influences how you see what you're doing. It influences how you do what you're doing, and it influences what the experiences you have along the way turn you into.
Gotcha. So is that something that you feel like someone should write down and then as part of a morning and evening routine, just constantly think about it, visualize it, and really just stay in that process? Because a lot of times a 3-year vision sounds great and you're excited about it, but then like you said, life happens, you have a bad day, things like that. Is it the morning and evening routines you feel like really ground that and cement it into your subconscious?
I think that that's really where you build your confidence. Yeah. I think it allows you to be intentional, which then allows you to do the things during the day that update your subconscious.
Gotcha.
I think just doing a morning and evening routine in and of themselves may not be enough, but I think that what they do is they pave the path for you to live intentionally and maybe even potentially courageously. And those are the things, the experiences that up-level your subconscious.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that morning and evening routine just allow you to set a path so that on a daily basis you can actually make steps forward. It's the steps forward that create peak experiences, and the peak experiences are what create this reframe the subconscious.
Absolutely. And I remember still one of the Thomas Edison quote, and it's amazing still when I will ask my subconscious a question, and sometimes it won't come the next morning or even the next week, but man, those answers seem to come to me. And so it is a powerful exercise, just adding a few little things at night before you go to bed and really just priming yourself for success.
Yeah. I really think it's literally just directing your brain. I think the big, one of the big problems with just all of us is that we have these brilliant tools, our brain, our mind, all these things, but we just don't direct them. Like they just like are dormant or directionless. And so we don't get as much out of them as we could. And so I think that these exercises are really about just channeling. Like one of the things that Dan Sullivan says that I like is, and this really goes with selective attention, is that your eyes and your ear, your eyes can only see and your ears can only hear what your brain is looking for. And so one of the reasons why setting goals is so big is because it literally just gives your brain something to actively work on and chew on. Like for me, for example, I didn't have to write this book, but because I was writing this book, my brain spent 2 years thinking about personality. Like if I had chosen to do something different, my brain would have spent 2 years thinking about that. And so I think what you do when you have a goal is you just give your brain a direction of something to work on. And then obviously it can become an identity and it can reshape your subconscious, your biology, etc. So I just think we are responsible for what we direct ourselves towards. And then we've got amazing tools and systems that help you along the way. Subconscious, brain, etc.
Right. Yeah, no, I think so many people just don't spend the time getting clear about what they want. And then they just go through the same week, month, year, and then they look back and they're like, what happened with my life? So yeah, I think intentional has really helped me. So you talk about the book. Obviously, you had Willpower Doesn't Work in March of 2018, you said. Now, coming up here, you're going to have your next one. What really inspired you to write this book? Was it something during the last one, or was it just another experience that you had?
It was, to be honest with you, it was reading the book, The Body Keeps the Score. The Body Keeps the Score is a really big book. I read it in, I think, the fall of 2018, maybe even the summer of 2018. And by the way, that book, The Body Keeps the Score, is like the #1 book on trauma. Just a big old meaty book. But one of the things that book talked about is that trauma creates a frozen personality. And I had never really set out to write a book on personality. I actually think that this topic's a lot thicker and harder to work with than like willpower and habits and things like that. This is a lot broader, but also a lot deeper. So I wasn't really thinking about writing this book, but when I was listening to that book, it just helped me realize that there's things that need to be addressed in order for people to go through the personal development changes that I know are possible. And there's things that need to be explained and addressed so that people can set themselves up so that change can happen, because there are things that make it very difficult, almost impossible, to make desired changes. One being trauma, even the subconscious. Like, you need to understand various things about it in order for you to really leverage it to make big jumps in your life. So I just wanted to write the book that helps people understand why it's so easy to get stuck in the past, why it's so easy to get stuck in patterns, why it's so easy to go on autopilot. Environment, roles, your story, just like literally laying it out from the foundation, so that and personality really is. And what's interesting about personality as well is just what a popular, trendy topic it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, personality tests are a multi-billion-dollar industry. Like, people really are trying to understand who they are. And I think that the mainstream perspectives and the general approach of people is really a limiting mindset about what all this is. And so I wanted to kind of bust some of the myths and cause a stir with this book.
Okay, I like it. Disrupting the industry. So what are some of the common myths with personality? Because I know that's something I've had a few coaches talk about, knowing your personality and working with people that are, for the right role, if you're outsourcing and things like that. So what are some of the common ones that we just think and take as fact?
I mean, the first major one is that there's such thing as personality types. Like that's a very low level way of looking at people.
When you say personality types, you're talking just like broad, like extrovert, introvert, ambivert, things like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, to some degree, like those, yeah, like to throw people into that category and assume it's always true. Like, you may actually consider yourself an introvert, but that's not always true. Like, I would argue that context would show that there's some situations where that's true and there's some situations where that's not. And so personality tests like Myers and Briggs that give you a score and then they put you into a category or as a type of person are not scientific. Like, they're scientifically flawed. They're not consistent. They're not valid. And what the research shows is that if you take those tests over a long enough period of time, your scores are going to change. If you take those tests in different environments or with a different emotional, in a different mood, like, you're going to get different scores for a million different reasons. One study showed that there was two separate groups. One group took the same test over 2 times over a period of time with the same test administrator. The other group got the same test, same time interval, but with 2 different administrators. And that alone led to like totally different scores. Like, with a different administrator, you get way different scores. Whereas in the other group, it was a little more consistent. So these are really finicky tests. The reason people really love and like them is because what they do is they provide people with a sense of identity. If you haven't spent the time to clarify and define your own sense of self, which I think very few people have, then these tests can provide a lot of relief, because then you feel like you can explain yourself to other people. You get a score and it allows you some form of constraints to be able to explain yourself, like, oh, I'm this, not that. And I think that's really, it removes a lot of confusion or ambiguity for people. It allows them to simplify their life and explain their identity to people. So it gives people an identity. It also gives people labels, and it creates tunnel vision, where you assume that the label is always true. Yeah. And then you overly come to defend the label, and you use the label as the basis for your goals, rather than seeing that it's a snapshot and a perspective, and that it's going to change, and that, rather than basing your whole life on this score, what if you chose what you really wanted? And so I think it leads to a fixed mindset. But the general consensus, just to pull it all together, is that your personality, and it's something that must be discovered. And so this is what leads people to taking personality tests, is because they're trying to discover themselves. The other, main perspectives are that it's generally unchangeable, and that it's based on your past. And so this leads people to go search themselves out, to get the right tests. And then once they've discovered themselves, then they can build their whole life around this personality so that they can be happy. It's a very pain versus pleasure way of looking at people, where it's like, you should only do those things that bring joy or, that bring pleasure, and you should avoid everything that creates pain.
Right.
But I think, thinking about you, like I guarantee you've gone through huge amounts of pain mentally, emotionally, etc., to become the golfer you are, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, would you argue, has it been the hardest thing you've ever done?
I would argue it's either golf or entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And those are the two things that you keep pursuing. Like,
oh, absolutely.
None of them are easy for you, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I was the worst golfer in high school, worst golfer in college. I actually barely made the team freshman year. Basically, the coach said, "I see something in you," and then 4 years later, I was the best player on the team. So it's constantly having to level up. So yeah, 100%.
I mean, writing is not easy for me. Like, yeah, sometimes I can get into a flow state and sometimes I can just bust it out. But like, that has nothing to do with my innate personality. That has to do with like the gruel that I've put myself through to develop these skills and perspectives. And so the idea that you should just find who you are and then pursue what's natural is totally a very limited perspective. And it leads people to mediocre, not only identities, but mediocre pursuits. And you see this in, pop culture these days. Like teenagers these days are boycotting having to do like in-class oral presentations because it's too scary and they shouldn't be required to do something that causes anxiety. They should be able to, we tailor the education around like what's comfortable to them. Like this is the type of thinking of, I have an innate self, I have an authentic self, and I should only do what's comfortable to me. And like, that's a very limiting view of personality.
How do you think your personality has changed over those 6 years now that you've been doing all this? What kind of big transformations or shifts have you seen?
Oh my goodness. Just so I'll start with the biggest and the most obvious. Going from 0 to 5 kids. Like, how does that not change you? Like, going from 0 to 3 kids out of the gate, and 3 of these kids are foster kids. Like, that's been such a transformational journey, so difficult. For the first year of being a foster parent, I didn't want to do it. Like, it was the hardest thing I've ever done, and it's still the hardest thing I've ever done. But over time, if you invest in something, you start to develop purpose in it. And so, like, I've now come to get a lot of purpose out of being a father, and it's reframed my goals. It's reframed what matters to me. It reframes my perspective, and gives me a sense of purpose that then shifts what I do. So, like, if I didn't have these kids, I would be in a different place. I don't know who I'd be or where I would be, to be honest with you, or what I'd be pursuing. But because of these kids, it alters my goals. It alters my focus. And I think that I've become a lot more mature because of having to go through this. Going even through a PhD program has made me a lot different of a thinker. One of my favorite quotes from Robert Kiyosaki is that intelligence is the ability to make finer distinctions. And I think finer distinctions is just the ability to see things, differently than other people see them. And I think my PhD program led me to looking at the world very differently as a psychologist, where when I even look at my old writing, I think it's radically overly simplistic. And like, I disagree with even a lot of my former writing, because I don't see the world the same way. Like, I love the quote.
That's how you're evolving, right?
Yeah. I mean, I love the quote from Elaine de Button: if you're not embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago, you didn't learn enough. But this same line of thinking should be applied to your future self. Okay. That your future self is not you. Hopefully they see the world a lot better than how you see it right now. Hopefully they've got a lot more mature perspectives, mature goals, or more mature values. Hopefully they value and spend their time in better ways. Hopefully they've gained some hard-earned wisdom through wins, losses, failures, learning experiences. And so if you realize that your future self is a different person than you, and then you can hold more loosely your current identity, and you don't have to overly defend it and assume that who you are right now is the finished product. Like the Harvard psychologist, what's his name? Daniel Gilbert. He's got a great TED Talk called The Psychology of Your Future Self. Brilliant TED Talk. Definitely check it out. It's like 7 minutes long. It's short.
Nice.
He talked about one of his core quotes from that idea is that human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. Human beings think that who they are right now is the finished product, not true. They're going to change whether they're intentional or not. And so if you think you're a finished product, I mean, you've got this fixed mindset already. And so I like the idea of owning the fact that, yeah, you can see some big change in the past, but hopefully you'll see that same level, if not bigger change in the future. And if that's true, then your current views are wrong, or at least they're wrong from the perspective of your future self. And so that would require updating yourself and having experiences and continuously learning, and not overly holding on to who you think you are, or your identity.
Do you feel like as people go through this journey, they have to like learn to forgive themselves for the past and really just get intentional about the future? That seems to be the biggest theme that I've found so far in my own life. And obviously just with our talk today, is that you really just need to get clear about your future self and understand that you are going to change, and that your environment, the people around you, all that will change. Does that kind of come with the territory?
I think that forgiving former self is huge. I mean, one aspect of the past is that it's not objective. Like, just as an example, like there's the Stephen Covey quote, "We don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are." And so like the same is true of our past. Like we see the past from the perspective of our current selves. And so if you still view the past the same way you did, like let's just say various experiences the same way you did the moment they happened, what that means is that you have a frozen personality. What that means is that you haven't adapted and developed and matured your perspective of those former experiences. And so yes, it's huge to forgive your former self. Yes, it's huge to have empathy towards your former self, because they're a different person than you. They were in a different situation. They were handling things differently. They didn't have the knowledge you have. They didn't have the situation you have. And so it's good to first off realize that that's not you right now. And it's good to be incredibly empathetic towards that person, and to further realize why they were the way they were, because you've got different context. And so, you have content and you have context, and the context is always more powerful. And so when you change the context, you actually change the content. So I'll give an example. My mother-in-law was recently at the gym. Did I tell you this story or no?
I don't believe so.
Yeah. So my mother-in-law was recently at the gym, and like literally like a couple weeks ago, and there was a very obese woman in the gym, like working out, and this woman was wearing incredibly tightly fitted workout clothes. And it was like awkward for a lot of people, because it's like, it's something you just don't really see every day, But this girl looked pretty confident. Like she was just holding herself, even though like people were maybe giving her like terrible looks, and my mother-in-law was intrigued. And so like they were working out kind of close to each other. My mother-in-law was asking her some questions, and she found out that this woman has, over the last year or so, lost 150 pounds.
Wow.
So just a quick question for you. How does that information change how you would view this girl?
Oh yeah. 100% different.
So did the content change? Did she change, or did your view of her change?
Yeah, just the view of her change.
So that's what we're talking about here, how context changes content. Context is so much more important than just the thing. And so memory is the exact same way. Your memory is flexible and it's always changing, as is your story of the past. And as you become kind of a more conscious and emotionally developed person, you become the narrator of your former experiences. You shape the context. You shape the meaning of what your experiences meant. And so, yeah, your past should change. It needs to change. Even your current version of the past, hopefully your future self sees it differently, better, more mature, and can use it. I mean, one of the things that you want from your past is you want your past to be information. You don't want it to be emotion. If it's emotion, then that means you're still being driven by the past, and you're still making decisions based on the pain of former experiences, and you're probably pursuing more limiting goals. But if you've gone back, and if you've addressed it, and if you've altered the context and the meaning of your former experiences, then you can use the experiences you've had as information to make better decisions in the future. So from that standpoint, your past can be something that's happened for you, not to you. It's something that can be incredibly valuable, a huge resource that you can use to make better decisions and to avoid a lot of problems and pain in the future. But if it's something that you haven't addressed, then chances are, because you're avoiding it and haven't dealt with it, you're going to just be repeating it.
Yeah, I love that you said life's happening for you. I think that's something I always carry with me. And I remember, like you had mentioned, if you look at a past event, the same way as you do now, like there's something wrong. And I remember at the time it was like 2015 and I didn't get this job promotion that I thought I deserved. And I was so upset. I was going to quit. I was having like the worst day ever. I felt ashamed, embarrassed. Everyone thought I was getting the job. Instead, I started writing my first book, and a year and a half later, I got the job, and then I quit right after that because I had already
You'd become a different person.
I became a different person, and now looking at that moment, it was the worst thing that could have happened. I was so ashamed and embarrassed, and now I'm like, that's the best thing that could have happened. And having that perspective, because it made me get out of my box and begin entrepreneurship and starting this whole journey. But yeah, sometimes it's really easy to get emotional. So I like that you said, stay objective, look at the past and how it can serve you, but don't let it limit, and really have that fixed mindset for obviously what you can do for the rest of it.
Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. Well, I know we got a little bit of time left here, but one thing that you briefly mentioned and I'm curious about as well is, speaking of these past events, and you mentioned trauma in that book, what, if there are, seems like some people have these big events that really have shaped their life. And is that something that, usually they're negative, sometimes they're positive as well, but a lot of times those really hold us back from reaching our next future self and our true potential. So is that something you talk about in the book and find ways to help people get over past events that have really shaped their lives?
Yes. There's a whole chapter on trauma.
Okay.
So just for overview, there's 4 levers of personality. 1 is trauma. 2 is your identity narrative, the way you explain yourself. 3 is subconscious. 4 is environment. These are the 4 things that shape who you are. And if you don't address or change these things, then you're going to keep showing up the same way. And so trauma, I would argue that I honestly don't know if I could say any of them are bigger than the others. But trauma is huge. I mean, unresolved trauma is definitely, it influences you. So there's a few quotes here. One is from Peter Levine. Peter Levine said, trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what you hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. So Peter Levine is he's an expert on trauma. He wrote a book called Waking the Tiger, but the idea is that it's not what happens to you, it's what you hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. It's what you hold inside, you internalize it. Some negative event happens to you and you internalize it into a story. And that's, right. They call it a cognitive commitment in psychology, but essentially you commit to an idea. And that story then forms your identity, and that identity then forms what you do. And so the other quote is from Robert Brault, and he said, we're kept from our goal not by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal. And so the idea is that let's just say you want to be a professional golfer, and you have some massive defeat. Something happens. You either get injured or you just straight up lose a contest, and it's just brutally painful. Basically, or let's just say some pro that you admire just walks up to you and just says, dude, I just want to let you know, I'm just going to try to save you some pain. There's no way you're going to make it in this world. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what if your favorite golfer walked up to you and said that to you? And so the idea is that trauma could be an event. I mean, something bad happens, but it could also just be something that someone said to you. The idea is that you internalize a story, and that what that happens with that story is that it completely shuts off your imagination towards the future. It was so painful and internalized as a fixed mindset. And the commitment is that I shouldn't do this anymore, or whatever limiting form that is. And it leads you to pursuing something different, generally pursuing lesser goals, because it's just easier. You'd avoid the pain of dealing with that again. And so obviously this is why you need an empathetic witness. This is why in order to go kind of big and far in things, you need coaching, you need mentoring, because there's so many ups and downs to learning and development and deliberate practice and things like that, you can't really do it on your own. Like you need literally lots of people to support you through the emotional highs and lows. Otherwise, some event's going to occur. It's going to be framed as a trauma, and you're going to say, I just don't have it in me. This is my level. This is the max I can go with this thing. I can't, like, I've hit my peak. When that's not necessarily true. It's just you've lost your imagination, and you're no longer pursuing a future self because now it's just too painful and hard. So trauma shapes what you do and who you are. And if you've had hard experiences in the past, chances are your future is incredibly limited as far as how you see it. And and you're dealing with it in negative ways, whether that be addiction or other coping mechanisms. And so how a lot of people explain it is that your personality is generally or often the coping mechanism to your former trauma that you haven't resolved.
Wow, that's really good. I love the third, like you said, having that third party. Like I remember when I had a hot seat call with you, and I said something, and you don't know my past, you don't know any of this stuff, and you just told me what to do, and I had never even thought about it. I was like, oh, I should just double my rates, and from then on, I've only had double my rates, and they went higher. But I was so limited still by thinking I wasn't good enough or experienced enough, all that stuff. And now I have coaches and masterminds and things like that, and it's amazing what that objective party can help you out with, because you can't do it all alone.
No, and you get so in your head and you box yourself in with all the emotions that you need an outside perspective and an outside witness to give you a different perspective and to help you realize that your views aren't totally great in the moment, and that you can change how you see this thing and you can change your perspective. So you definitely need outside parties to help you to reshape how you see even former experiences or how you deal with future experiences that are going to be difficult as you're pursuing some future self.
Nice. Well, I'm excited for you. I know Personality Isn't Permanent is going to be a great book, July 16th there. So I'm excited for you to hit that 10 million copies. I'm happy to contribute to those as well. Before I ask my last question, what is the best place that people can follow along and get constant Benjamin wisdom in their lives?
Yeah, benjaminhardy.com is where the current, blog and situation is. Who knows what it's going to be in the future? Okay. But Personality Isn't Permanent is the thing to consider. It is a book that I think will transform your life and your thinking. And you can get it on any, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Audible, Kindle, wherever you like books.
Perfect. Love it. And for the last question, what do you think is something that people can run with, obviously, besides just reading the book, that someone can really start to begin to reprogram their personality? What's like the first step they could take?
I would say be freaking open and honest about what you really want. Like, for example, you've told me for a long time you want to be a professional golfer. I think that that's very admirable, that your story is based on your future self, not on your former self. Mm-hmm. And you're striving to be consistent with that future self. And I think that that's rare. I think that often people are not explicit and blunt and fully open about what they truly want. I think that often we hide what we really want so that we can be accepted by peers or things like that. So my challenge would be to really think about, what would you truly want and choose if you could have it? You might not ever get it and you might fail along the way, but what would you choose to pursue because you want it that bad? And then to turn that into your new narrative. That's your future self, and that's now how you describe yourself. That this is who you are and this is what you're going for. And once you start to say what you're going to do and who you're going to be, rather than defaulting and saying who you've been and what you've done, then you start to get a more clarified identity, and your identity becomes more focused on the future self that you genuinely want. And then your behavior can become a lot more clear, and you can become a lot more intentional about taking active steps in that direction and having the transformational learning experiences along the way. So I would challenge people to be explicit and honest about what they really want, and to start telling that to everyone, and then to start using that as your kind of your metric for how you live on a daily basis.
Incredible answer. I could go on and on with you, man. Thank you so much for being on the show, and I'm so excited for your book launch.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. I think we sent you a PDF, so it's all yours.
Yes, I just got it. I'm super excited about it. So thank you again.
Yeah, happy to be on your show, brother.
All right, guys. Well, hopefully you enjoyed that interview with Dr. Benjamin Hardy. It was just such a pleasure for me. Again, full circle, to come from taking his mastermind, transforming my life, helping me make more money writing, to then having a podcast and having him on the show. Hopefully that just goes to show you that amazing things can happen when you just stay persistent and consistent. And hopefully also you can learn that, again, sometimes you just got to get some help and find that mentor, find someone that will guide you through a time, and just, it's all about finding people that you resonate with and who are doing what you want to do. And so that's what I did with Benjamin. That's what I've done with other online courses. And of course, if you're a writer, that's what I do inside Freelance to 5K and inside the coaching program. So if I can help with anything, please, as always, let me know. I want to be a resource to you. You can take a look at the show notes to learn some more ways to get started. Again, But yes, hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I would listen to it several times. Dr. Benjamin Hardy is a genius, and make sure you take a look and pick up his new book, Personality Isn't Permanent. You can click the link in the bio to snag that on Amazon. And again, highly recommend you follow him on Medium as well. He is publishing back a little bit more on the platform, as well as his blog. So again, do not miss out. This guy has really cracked the code to writing, but also how the brain works and how to find success in your life. So thanks again for listening. Really, really appreciate you. And as always, I hope you have an epic day. Thanks for listening to this episode of Inspire Your Success podcast. If you're the kind of person who likes to help others, please leave a positive review on iTunes so more people can learn about the show. Also, if you have any questions about freelancing, I'm here to assist. Please email support@inspireyoursuccess.com, and I may even use your question for a future episode topic. And if you want more inspiration and freelance writing tips to build your business, follow me on Instagram. My username is @IamMichaelLeonard. Finally, if you're ready to learn how to make your first $1,000 as a freelance writer, check out my free 7-day series at inspireyoursuccess.com/1K. Thanks again for listening.